So we're going to start with the war in Ukraine, but we're actually starting in Moscow. President Zelensky, of course, saying that the war is coming to Russia. Take a look at this drone attack on an office block in Moscow. And it is 2 in 2 days. 3 government ministries live inside that block. The mayor of Moscow saying nobody was hurt. Well, this was the aftermath of the second attack last night. Also, several drones reportedly shot down by air defence systems. Right, take a look at this map and the red dots there. Moscow has reported a number of drone attacks throughout the year. These are some of the many targeted, as you can see there, close to the Ukraine-Russia border. So what does all this mean? Well, here's Nick Beak at the BBC's Evidence Hub.
Drones striking at the heart of the Russian capital are undoubtedly a big psychological boost for the Ukrainians. But here at BBC Verify, we've been looking at the impact they've been having, what's really happening on the ground and in the air. Have a look at this video. This is the latest strike on Moscow. You can see this video in the aftermath of the attack, the damage to this particular skyscraper building. You can see the windows there blown out. And this complex was targeted 24 hours earlier, and we've got a video of that. And you can see just after a few seconds quite a huge explosion here that rips through what is the business financial district in Moscow, and some people come out at this point to work out what's been going on, and they start to record on their phone the aftermath of this. If we have a look at a map, this is the place we're talking about. It's home to government buildings, also some luxury flats, restaurants, as well as other buildings. And it's not far away from the Kremlin at all, is it? This is actually about 5 kilometers away. So when the Ukrainians talk about the war coming to President Putin's doorstep, this is what they mean. This is a satellite image of the block that was struck twice in 48 hours. This is actually all the same building, and you can see it was a target for the Ukrainians. If we are thinking about the actual drone that was used, in those videos you can't see anything clearly at all, but have a look at this video, because this is something that we've been looking at here at BBC Verify. This was taken on the outskirts of the Russian capital, a distinctive shape, this drone, because you can see that the rear wing is much bigger than the first one. This video we've put on loop here, but we've been asking drone experts to take a look at this, and they say it points to this particular drone. Come and have a look at this, with the larger rear wing, the smaller front wing, and they're saying it looks very much like it's a Baibior drone, which is Ukrainian made. It's a long-range device. Apparently it has a range of up to 1,000 kilometers, so potentially enough to fly from Ukrainian-controlled territory to Moscow. Worth pointing out, Ukraine has not said it's responsible for these attacks. We don't know where these drones were sent out from. What we have been trying to do here at BBC Verify is look at the bigger picture here. And to do that, we've been looking at Russian media and all reports of suspected drone strikes so far this year. Have a look at this map. So there is a concentration around Moscow. That is clear there, but also down towards the Belarusian border as well. Also, if you look at the Kyiv region of Ukraine, around here, just over the border, as well as other Ukrainian drone strikes reported in Russian-controlled Crimea. You can see all of those attacks there. And through looking at these reports, we can say that there have been at least more than 120 attacks, drone attacks, so far this year. So this gives an indication of how the Ukrainians are striking not just at the Russian capital, but other parts of Russia itself and Russian-controlled territory.
Thanks to Nick for that. And 2 more quick updates for you. Russia says it's destroyed 3 Ukrainian unmanned boats that were trying to attack 2 Russian naval ships in the Black Sea. Also, drone attacks are taking place on Ukraine too, in Kyiv. A college dormitory here was hit by a drone overnight into Tuesday. And more than 80 people were injured after this missile strike on Monday. Right, I want to speak now to my colleague Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring, which analyses media around the world, and Hannah Shelest from Ukraine Analytica, an academic journal, is in Odessa. Thanks both for coming on the programme.
Thank you.
So I want to look at two areas here. Firstly, these drone attacks on Moscow. I want to spend a bit of time looking at the Russian reaction to that and what it can tell us, if anything, about the wider counter-offensive. And we'll get onto that a little bit later. Vitaly, let's come to you first. These drone attacks in Moscow, what's the narrative around these in Russian media?
Well, the Kremlin's media machine is trying to use these attacks as further justification of what officials in Moscow insist on calling the special military operation in Ukraine. They're saying that Ukraine is a threat that needs to be tackled, and also there's a certain degree of unwillingness to focus on these highly embarrassing attacks too much. But that seems to be the whole point of what may possibly be an attack carried out by Ukraine or by somebody sympathetic towards Ukraine, which is to undermine President Putin's key stated objective of his operation in Ukraine, which was to make Russia safer. But as residents of Moscow could see over the past few days, this hasn't really happened, and in fact security in Moscow has become much, much worse.
And what do you think that does to the support for Vladimir Putin, the support for the war in Ukraine amongst ordinary people in Moscow?
Well, I've been able to speak to one resident of Moscow earlier today, and she said that her friends and relatives were not particularly concerned about this, because clearly the impact of these drone attacks has been minimal. Some glass shattered in Moscow's business quarter, which also happens to house some ministries. This clearly isn't going to trigger a sweeping change of how Russians feel and how they see the special military operation. But if you follow conversations on social media in Ukraine, these attacks, they tend to be seen as the beginning of something which Ukraine can achieve in the future, a demonstration of capability. So these attacks are something that's being watched closely, both in Russia and in Ukraine.
Interesting. Vitaly, stay right there. Let's go to Hannah Shelest now. Just I want to pick up on that point from Vitaly just before he got on to his final point there, about this idea that actually it's just some broken glass. Nothing too major. Is this, in your assessment, a successful Ukrainian policy or military strategy or not?
The question is, what was the task, what was the aim? And the aim was definitely not the military, but first of all, psychological. And we understand that this action was not reaching the ammunition depot or logistical point, something that we usually see on, for example, in Rostov, in Belgorod, or in Crimea. So in this case, the psychological information, in fact, is much more important. And here, when you follow the Russian social networks, you definitely can find these two main feelings. First of all is disbelief, how Ukrainians managed to do it. If they managed to do it in Moscow, that should be the most protected city. So what they will be able to do in other parts of Russia. And Russian propaganda for months has been presenting Ukrainian armed forces as weak and incapable. So how they can be incapable in case they can do something like this. The second is a light panic, because as Vitaly said, the security measures in Moscow increased with since the first attack against Kremlin. And also we saw all this military equipment even in the roof of the Ministry of Defense. And as a result, still we have several nights with Ukrainian drones without injuries, because that is definitely without victims. It is the goal of these drones to be used against the building where the ministries and some business people being stationed. So what it says about the Russian air defense, about Moscow air defense, and we understand that that is just a small part of the bigger puzzle of demonstrating to the Russian people as well that war is not something only in their Telegram channels. The war is real. and their army is not capable.
That's absolutely fascinating. Let's broaden it out now then, Vitaly, from just these drone attacks and just this specific tactic to the wider issue of the Ukrainian counter-offensive. How do these drone attacks feed into it, if at all, and what is happening?
Well, this war has already been called by many people as a drone war, and you can say that the future has arrived, albeit for all the wrong reasons. To put it simply, Ukraine doesn't have enough long-range missiles and military aircraft to target Russian troops and hardware from a safe distance. That's why it's had to rely on drones. And we've seen numerous videos and pictures where off-the-shelf, Chinese-made, relatively cheap drones have been modified to drop grenades onto Russian troops, for example. And that's a tactic that Ukraine has been using reasonably successfully. In terms of the wider counteroffensive, as Hannah will know, there's a debate going on in Ukrainian media whether this is even the right question to ask, whether it's progressing fast enough, because as we've seen over the past months, even the square kilometers captured by Russians, by Ukrainians over the past weeks, they come at an increasingly high price. So the battle goes on. People in Ukraine die on an almost daily or nightly basis, and it's a tragic situation no matter how you look at it.
Hannah, I want to come to you. I want to pick up that first point that Vitaly made there about the lack of strength of Ukraine in the air. Ukraine chose to launch this counteroffensive without air superiority. And lots of military experts at the time said, fair enough, you can't wait, you've got to go, fine, but did not envy a position where you're trying to launch a major counteroffensive to reclaim territory without superiority in the air. Is it a fact now that Ukraine simply has to wait for that to arrive?
You know, that is difficult question from the very beginning, because definitely when you look to the US operations, it's always been a huge air support. But at the same time, we understand that we would not have the superiority for at least the next 6-7 months. Does it mean that we should allow Russia to continue their offense operations for these 7 months? Does it mean that Ukrainian people should continue living under the occupation and all those war crimes for the next 7 months? That's why Ukraine, since the day one, tried to be asymmetric and creative as much as possible. That's why there are so many drones. That's why the counteroffensive started from attacking Russian ammunition and logistics, so to limit supply to the front line, and Russian production is not so quick as it used to be in the beginning of the war. That's why Ukraine tried the counteroffensive in the several dimensions, because the front line is more than 1,000 kilometers, and Russians couldn't identify where these real big counteroffensive will take place. That's why partisans work. That's why a lot of other stuff, because unfortunately we cannot wait till that moment when our Western allies finally decide that, okay, you deserve to have F-16 or something like this. And that's why we are asking for air defense. The reason is we've been waiting for the last 6 months for these counteroffensive. Everybody was waiting for it in March. And because of our hesitation, I mean, Ukrainian side hesitation and our partners' hesitation, we received the situation that Russians managed to build quite a heavy defense line from the minefields at most parts of the front line.
OK, we must leave it there, but fascinating stuff. Hannah Shelest, Vitaly Shevchenko, thank you both very much.